The last time I recorded a conversation with Thomas Bryer, he was deep into his research on the national park system, spending hours interviewing volunteers and visitors. In what feels like the blink of an eye, that work has become a casualty of today's political climate, its funding pulled amidst growing tensions. In a recent piece published on Muni Square, Tom shared the news. When his students asked whether their own work might be flagged, he encouraged them to stay the course. He told them, continue to do the work you know is important and that is valuable to you and your life and career ambitions. Don't expect your university to promote what you do or the significance of your achievements for yourself, your students, your community, your country, or the world. His counsel feels wise for any age in history. Today, we talk about the relationships between universities and the current administration of our federal government, a relationship that was once a tango and now feels more like a tangle. But we also shift the conversation towards what it means to be an active participant in government at the most local level. This includes how we respond constructively to decisions we disagree with and how we maintain integrity in public service, especially when the rules of engagement seem to be changing overnight. I'm Nancy Hess, host of Muni Square. We are so glad you are here. You can find more conversations and content at munisquare.substack.com, where we're elevating public service, expanding possibilities, and exploring innovation without boundaries. Now let's get started. I wanted to stay focused on a few themes that I wrote about and take this conversation wherever you'd like to go with it. But I was struck by your writing from Muni Square, exploring in your mind and also sharing with students. This idea is that this is a new day. This is a time of uncertainty, and change is a question we have to sit with. You said in your article something to the effect that your students were wondering, should I not write about this or do this because it could not be accepted? And you said you have to go forward with what you believe in and what you feel your mission is for your work without knowing really at this point what's happening in the academic environment. It seems to me that it extends pretty far. I can't think of where it doesn't extend. And it is extending in local governments. Just yesterday, I called a client. We'd had, arrangements for me to do some work that was pass-through funding from the federal government down to the local government to do strategic planning for the year. Nothing. This is what I think most people are saying. We don't know because we haven't heard anything.
Yeah, a freeze on everything. Higher education institutions are being challenged, and so there's this value compromise proposition again. Your observation is a good one that higher ed institutions can shout about the importance of diversity, inclusion, democracy, and these things being challenged. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a convening of scholars and practitioners focused on democracy, higher education, and teaching and learning. I made the observation, I think it's an accurate one, which is higher ed institutions, generally speaking, there are exceptions, but higher ed institutions in the United States specifically are not the best messenger for crying about the pullback of democratic institutions, because we ourselves are not democratic institutions, and increasingly so. And the same can apply to questions of diversity, equity, inclusion. We have made great strides to be inclusive, and the rhetoric around inclusion and diversity has existed in higher education. Whether we have achieved all that is possible, certainly not. It becomes a bit easy to criticize higher ed institutions, to say money is being misspent. We have significant investment in offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion without measurable outcomes readily apparent. Some of that is true, some not, but the fact that we haven't been all in consistently as a sector makes it an easy target. But what's happening right now, unfortunately, is a divide and conquer approach. every institution is being targeted one by one, is being picked off one by one. That's really threatening because every institutional leader is saying, do we compromise our independence to dictate our own governance, our own faculty affairs, our own course selections, our own student requirements? Or do we accommodate those who are in power right now in order to continue to receive access to federal resources? It's possible for institutions to say, take the federal money away, take these grants away. We have endowments. This is particularly true for the elite institutions. But those endowments are there for not the purpose of basic research, right? Those endowments are created to support students. They're created to support new innovation. They're created to support partnerships. And when you start drawing down on those endowment funds, you are drawing down on access, you are drawing down on innovation, you are drawing down on all that is possible in scientific discovery. And that's a problem. We can't just say universities can deal with it. The formula for federal funding with indirect costs associated with National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health grants, all of that is critical to scientific discovery. Without that, as a country, we're going to fall behind. And as a world, we're going to fall behind in solving challenges fast coming towards us in this century. If we cut back on university funding for research, we're not going to be prepared for the next pandemic. Full stop.
Right.
That's a problem.
Right. Coming to mind is an absence of vision. It's one thing to say we're going to cut back on grants related to XYZ, but this is where we want to go as a nation. I mean, nobody wants nobody would debate that having a national policy working towards workplace development, health and science research, you name it, having that outlined. I have always felt that we have lacked that sort of core vision for our country. If you were a local government, that would be the first thing that you would realize is missing. So if you've got funds and you're going to allocate them as a federal government, what is it exactly that you're looking for? But if you're saying, no, we're not going to allocate those funds because we don't believe in those funds, they haven't said that either. They've said nothing. There's been a complete vacuum. Like it's as if they're saying, we're going to pull back all this money and then figure out what we're doing.
Right. In the context of universities and possibly K-12 schools, there's the threat of pulling back resources unrelated to diversity, equity, and inclusion as a stick to bend policies and change course offerings and gain control over general education requirements and undergraduate curriculum. In Florida, we've been at the forefront nationally with the governor's office pursuing these policies at the state level. We've had more time to adjust to this reality compared to other institutions in the country. We've got this new tool and the willingness, it's not a new tool, but this willingness of elected officials and policymakers and regulators to use the leverage of any funds that are available to change behavior of organizations in an unrelated space. My fear is for the sector, and this applies to local government too, if a government, and we see this in Maine at a state level, if school districts do not bend to the policy, funds will be pulled back in other areas unrelated to that policy. What we're seeing is a willingness to use this harsh stick to get organizations and institutions to bend. And once that tool is now freely in use and it's accepted in its use, then we're not free from it. Then we're going to be shifting wildly back and forth. And this gets uncertainty. We might have a new administration in 4 years, but these governance tools are still going to be with us. So whichever administration, whatever policy, whatever ideology is driving the agenda, we're going to be potentially subject to these whims and wishes and this new highly aggressive form of control, which is going to send organizations and private sector as well. Law firms are going to send organizations in a pattern. And that's
up and down.
That's an uncertainty that is really uncomfortable for particularly the public sector, where we cherish and see value in stability. We can deliver good service to citizens because we are stable. If we cannot count on that stability, then then we can't do the strategic planning. We can't do long range planning. We can't think about long term community development. None of this is possible if we are thinking possibly a new governor, a new mayor, a new president is going to use these new harsh tools of control to change funding availability.
Where do you see pushback since you've had experience and many of us are just trying to wrap our brains around this resistance or organized efforts to continue on, just as you said, continuing with the mission of the work. This is the way we see our mission. This is the way we see the work. We're going to continue to do it despite perhaps these overtures that this something is going to happen if you don't. Do you see that in Florida?
The word resistance is interesting. I heard just the other day some conversation around whether we are actively or some people or organizations are actively involved in resistance, or are they involved in something a little bit different. So it's not active adversarial resistance. It's what a scholar in the 1980s wrote about, Marissa Golden. She framed as kind of a negligence, but she used it in a very specific way. She was writing about Environmental Protection Agency officials during the Reagan administration who were opposed to the direction President Reagan and his appointees were pushing the EPA. And she framed the choice that administrators and officials in the EPA had in that context as one of four possibilities. And three of them are fairly well known: exit, voice, or loyalty. Leave the organization, express voice to superiors and argue that the policies are misguided, not thoughtful of whatever the context is, the values of the EPA, whatever it is. Or loyalty, saying we recognize our role as unelected civil servants to be neutral implementers of the policies passed by a duly elected individual. She introduced a fourth perspective found in her research: neglect. Administrators do the bare minimum to follow elected officials, but not to harm.
That's the work to rule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but this is, so maybe we see some of this happening, but it's happening. It's kind of a dangerous space to be in that right now, to say that there are some across sectors who are practicing negligence, because that's risky, right? With these mass firings, these terminations in higher education, we have new annual review procedures, new post-tenure reviews that are now required in Florida and increasingly in other states. There's no such thing as safe employment as it existed before. So neglect, it's the swamp that is talked about in a negative way, right? This neglect is a problematic thing. It's saying unelected civil servants have more power to survive beyond whatever the elected officials are saying at the moment, right? We might see some of that happening. But you do have some active resistance. You have individuals standing up saying, I am going to keep doing what I'm doing. This is what I wrote about in the blog and the Substack, the idea of individuals staying the course, researching what they will, implementing the programs that they want to implement, so long as the funding channels remain open, but without any expectation that their superiors or their organizations or their institutions will promote it, advocate it. These individuals won't be recognized or rewarded beyond regular procedures. There won't be any high-profile news media stories about what's going on related to the work and achievements. It's under the radar efforts. In my book, I wrote in 2024, I talked about this as subversive transparency. As officials, we're not trying to do this work under the table, under the radar. For me, myself, I am very open about what I do and what's guiding my work, what's guiding my research, the values that guide my work and my research. And I'm transparent about it. I'm transparently subversive in that I'm specifically thinking about how to communicate the work without my voice being the tool. Let others be the voice. And let the residents who are benefiting from the work, let the stakeholders who are benefiting from the work, let the individuals who are forming the agenda speak about the work and the results. It's not my voice, not the public administrator's voice, not the city manager's voice. It is the voice of the people being amplified, communicating this message. And that provides some protection. It's transparent, but it's subversive in saying, we're not going to stop what we're doing. I'm not going to be the one to proclaim it. I'm not going to be the one to stand up on stage unless I'm being interviewed for a podcast. As a general practice, that's not it. That's amplifying the voice of the people. The way I frame it is a vox populi rather than a vox professor, which is not a word, but that's the way I argue it. It's not the voice of the professor. It's not the voice of the administrator. It's not the voice of the civil servant, career civil servant being lifted up. It's the voice of the people through the work we're doing.
As I listen to you, I think about the voice lifted. It has a spiritual choral sense to it. It's that collective voice. And it's only when the individual is joined by other individuals who are inspired to do, again, what it is that they are called to do and not wait. I feel the expression is very important to not delay, not be hindered, not feel there's no point in silence, particularly now. The voices are so different. This is what I think is most interesting when I listen to people. I'm not going to get his name, the auto union leader. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah.
He was articulating why the tariffs are important for his members and was speaking with heart. The next thing out of his mouth was the things that he was not for. And that, that it was extremely important to have the relationships with Canada and on, that there, it just because there's a piece of this that is part of your heart, which holds a lot of people back. What we're trying to get over as a nation is that if we feel strongly about something, doesn't mean we have to buy the whole pie. This piece of the pie is so precious to us that is something we're going to fight for. But for the rest of this, we're not part of that we're not going to partake. The more those voices are lifted up, the more we get the chorus to lead us. We don't know where, but it is a point of fact that we're not alone because we're part of a chorus.
That's absolutely right. Therein lies the opportunity to say, I said before that higher education institutions are not the best messenger for decrying the drawback in democracy and democratic norms, but we are individuals who work in universities, and universities as reflexive institutions can say, yes, we acknowledge we are not. And at the same time, we can look at how policies like the tariffs policy are being pulled together and communicated. It's clear they are not developed inclusively with full discussion across stakeholders for what should be included, why should be included, what are the balances that need to be achieved in order to have a sensible policy where everybody wins a little bit, everybody's interests are met at least a little bit. We see a lack of inclusive democracy happening in these blunt instruments of control that are being exercised across state and local governments and national government. And we have to call that out, decry that, and we have to be prepared with recommendations as to how to do it differently. And local governments can be leaders in this. Universities, local governments can be the leaders in showing that inclusive democracy for creating good policy that benefits all residents in a community is possible. A blunt instrument of control is not the best way to make policy in a democratic system. It might take more time when time is of the essence from the perspective of an elected official who is term limited and cannot run again and has a short window to implement whatever their vision is. But that's not democracy, right? And so local governments really can be the the place for innovation, the place for experimentation, for inclusive democracy in a way that allows all voices to be heard. People don't have to live in fear of saying something for fear that they might lose their job, they might be blacklisted, they might not receive attention. When that happens, when we start self-censoring, that means we are self-doubting. That means we are losing our sense of efficacy. We are losing our sense of empowerment. And when you take all of those things combined, our democracy is on the way to collapse.
Yeah. And I think part of it is just capitulating our own agency. I carry frustration, anger at our senators and US senators. And that is misdirected energy. Where could I better use that energy? I think of your conversations with visitors at the US National Park. I'm embarking on conversations with local elected officials. Just to have a conversation with people, you will be able to identify in that issue, in that conversation, an issue that involves democratic process, that there is something within every conversation that we have from day to day, that if we were observant and if we were just more aware, we could say, there's something I could actually do or say something about or get involved in that doesn't require a lot, but it's day to day to day to day. It's that we mostly don't think about it. I mean, radical acts can include, for me, these are examples. Find out where your water comes from. I mean, you take it for granted that your water company is doing the best to get rid of PFAS and all of these other terrible things you read about. Have you ever just gotten online and found the map of exactly where that water comes from? I learned through US geological maps where sinkholes exist. Most people buy property and they just think somebody else is taking care of. They wouldn't put homes here if there were sinkholes underneath. I'm sure Florida, I can give you examples of people that moved to Florida, and learn, like, how could the local government have allowed for these properties to be built in this place? What they do is not always the local government officials initially at fault. They have a responsibility, but so does the homeowners, the developer. The more we learn, we understand the questions to ask to ensure the democratic process, to require transparency, to demand it. Our daily life, we are not waiting for somebody to do it for us, that we just do it. It's easier today than ever before to find information, when we can become better advocates for ourselves as citizens.
Your point about misdirected anger with senators is interesting and brings to mind an experience by the late U.S. Senator and Florida Governor Bob Graham. He wrote a book maybe 20 years ago called America, the Owner's Manual, a nice little pocket-sized book about the size of a car manual you'd stick in your glove box. That is a chapter by chapter how-to book for citizens and how to be an active, effective citizen. And he talks, I don't think he uses this phrase, but it's the idea of political intelligence, knowing who to go to get resolved the issue that you have or to get an answer to the question that you have. And one of his early experiences, at least in conversation, if not in the book, was when he was a member of the Florida legislature early in his career. He encountered a group of high school kids unhappy with the food at their school cafeteria. They found their way to his office in a legislative office, and they were complaining to him. And his question to them was, well, who else have you told about this? And I said, well, we went to the mayor of the city. We went to the city council. We went to, I forget all the list of agencies and organizations that he rattled off. And then he said, now we're coming to you. And then he said, well, that's your first problem. None of the people you named have anything to do with greasy pizza in your cafeteria. It's such an important but simple idea. Most of us don't know, myself included, that we have to start somewhere. If I have a problem, I need to know my jurisdictional lines. Where am I situated? What agency is responsible for my issue? We can all think about issues ranging from potholes to stray dogs to greasy pizza in a cafeteria. And so first identifying where should we go? That's absolutely step one. But then engaging in conversation with others to learn about how we can affect the change that we want to see. And he goes off. It's a brilliant book. I highly recommend it. America, the Owner's
I
Manual.
like that.
But the parallel story to that with the now what? So we've identified an issue. How do we work together to solve the problem? Requires that we learn to talk to people with whom we have never talked before, because fundamentally we will have similar concerns, though we'll have different ideological perspectives. When it comes to greasy pizza in a cafeteria, I don't care if you are a Democrat or a Republican, you think tariffs are good or bad. If you think DEI is positive or a dirty word, greasy pizza is greasy pizza. Let's talk about it. With the national parks, the best example that I came across most recently for an opportunity to bring folks together is at Gulf Islands National Seashore, located right on the Gulf of Mexico / America, situated at the campgrounds at Gulf Islands National Seashore. I saw visitors coming in wearing hats or T-shirts that proudly displayed their perspective on the question. Some wore hats and T-shirts that said Gulf of America. Some wore shirts and hats that said Gulf of Mexico. But what the wonderful thing is, they were all coming in and walking the same trails, going to the same beach, admiring the same wildlife, enjoying the same sunset, wearing these opposing ideological viewpoints. That was the opportunity for them to say, let's come together. It was suggested by a volunteer to make a new hat that says Gulf of blank, just an underline. Let's set up an experiment. Get people to approach a group wearing Gulf of blank shirts or hats and start conversations. What does that mean, Gulf of blank? It means it doesn't matter what the Gulf is called. We care about who's here, wildlife here. Let's talk about preserving this place for us and future generations. Then we can move forward, have conversation, learn what agencies are responsible for management of waterways, beaches, wildlife, campgrounds, infrastructure, roads to the campgrounds, and bridges to the islands where the seashore is located. All of that opens up a vast world of government people don't know much about. If we start with the shared interest of, isn't this a beautiful sunset? Okay, let's back that up to how do we all get to this place to enjoy the sunset together? What enables us to be here together enjoying this place? And then we build empathy. Then we lower the temperature. Then we stop demonizing. Then democracy is possible.
Yeah, and being able to arrive at a place is interesting if you put things into historical context. So taking Greenland or Canada, we can get, this is the most ridiculous idea, but go back a couple hundred years and think about other ridiculous ideas our presidents did. If we put things into context, a clear, this is what happened. The more we learn, the richer it gets, and the more we appreciate where we're at. We're on historic lands, rich with history, and we're sharing it right now.
Right.
So, hey,
that's the national parks exist on lands rich in history and culture. Park rangers and volunteers in interpretation and education, they have a responsibility to tell visitors coming in who have some knowledge, maybe biased information about the history that occurred there, about the people who lived there, about the people who traveled through a space. And it's the responsibility of the rangers and the volunteers to engage them in conversation, not to change their mind about how they interpret history or how they interpret contemporary political debate, but to give them pause so that they leave the national park location and think, maybe there's a different way to think about this issue beyond what I entered the conversation with.
Yeah.
If the parks can do that, if the rangers can do that while maintaining civility without getting into shouting matches with visitors, then they present a model for democracy that we all can learn from across sectors and levels of government.
I think you've hit on the trickiest point. It is really challenging today to distance ourselves enough to look at issues from a broader perspective and with others in a space that is that feels as much as possible as neutral so that we can ask questions and really admit that there's a lot we don't know. And the only way we're going to learn more is if we suspend what we thought we knew.
Right.
That's a challenge in local government. It's a challenge in academia. How do you refer to that? Neutral? Do you refer to it as a professional presence that you're trying to focus first and foremost on the learning and to set aside what it is that you've already perhaps arrived at on your own?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I interact with students, particularly now, I'm teaching 2 classes on public sector leadership right now. And students are responsible for writing case studies of leaders. Some choose individuals who have passed on, some choose individuals who are ripped from the headlines today. And my challenge within this environment as a professor in giving feedback is to communicate. This is where grading becomes a nasty instrument of education, because we have to grade students on their performance without being judgmental about whatever viewpoints that they express, because there's a fear within academia and in local government as well that we want to maintain some kind of sense of objectivity or neutrality, as you say. But we also have to demand high integrity, adherence to reasonableness and fact. That's what we strive to do in education. So if I have a student who submits an assignment that can be ripped from a talking points memo from a certain news station that has a biased viewpoint, then I see that clearly, then I have to push back and say, show me the data, show me the evidence. I'm not criticizing or judging your viewpoint. I'm criticizing your viewpoint in that it is not substantiated by any evidence or fact. And to some, that might feel threatening. They might feel unduly criticized. It forces the student and the citizen to step back and do their due diligence, use their political intelligence to find the right source of information to answer to the question that they have. It's not an easy thing. That's why within higher ed, and then the same with those in professional civil service who have to remain outside the political debate, we have to be in it in a way that allows all voices to be heard within an evidence-based context. That's not always easy because folks will feel challenged when asked for evidence. And that's how we start down a path of criticism, accusation, and viral moments on YouTube that nobody wants to see.
Tom, I think there's going to be examples that come up like case studies. This is a great preliminary conversation. We can come back and say, here's a situation. And based on what we've been discussing here, what are some ways that we can look at this without jumping to conclusions or making assumptions? We could check each other's assumptions and say, how do we look at this through the lens of a leader in academia, public administration, city manager, or police chief that are going to be really interesting to see how they're handled and what happens all the way through the courts and laws and so forth. So let's continue this conversation. You've got my brain already activated. So I'm going to be thinking about some examples and we can talk about them and come back and maybe invite some others to come on the show.
One last comment on the neutrality point. That some years ago, I wrote a little essay arguing that for those of us in academia, if you read a scholarly article, there's a little bio sketch attached to most of them that say, Professor so-and-so, University of such and such, and researches in these areas, and just a little bio sketch. And I suggested, that's all interesting, but it doesn't really help in communicating this fear of bias that exists within higher education, this liberal bias idea, right?
Yeah.
So I said, let's change our policy. Authors of articles to say Professor so-and-so is a member of such and such political party, considers themselves to be moderate, liberal, conservative, wherever it is. And so that readers, students, community members, policymakers, whoever's reading the article can see, yes, this is the identity of the person. They are fully transparent about who they are. And there's nothing that is going to be hidden. So read the article with that lens in mind, read the research with that lens in mind. And it's the job of the scholar to communicate and do the research in a way that is high in integrity, methodologically pure. So bias does not interfere. If it does, here's where the bias might be. And let's get other
Yeah.
at the table to engage this, to check the bias. Right.
Right. You say you're open to challenge. That makes that just a little easier. I don't have to spend all of my energy trying to figure out where you're coming from. If you're stating it, I know, and
Right.
I'm able to quickly say, that's interesting. So what do you think about this?
Right. I don't know if anybody would go for it, honestly, but I still think it's a good idea.
Okay. I like that. We'll set that up. Thank you, Tom, for taking the time today. It was great to have this conversation. We'll be in touch soon. I'll try to get this out next week.
Good. Yeah. I'm out of country all of next week.
You're out of country. Where are you going?
I'm teaching a course in Estonia at the University of Tallinn.
That's great. I love that place.
Beautiful city.
Thank you so much again. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, Nancy. Bye.
See you. Bye-bye.